SBC Media.
Welcome to iGaming Daily, analysing the news from the betting and gaming industry all over the globe. Supported by SBC Summit Latino America, bringing together the leadership teams and product specialists from retail and online operators in Latin American markets.
Discover the potential of Latin America's booming iGaming and sports betting markets at SBC Summit Latin America, the premier industry event in the region. Join SBC at the Seminole Hard Rock Hotel and Casino in Miami from October 31st to November the 2nd. Register now at sbcevents.com.
This week was the 35th anniversary of the passing of the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act, so it's perhaps fitting that the big news of the past month have been the developments surrounding the legal challenges to Florida's sports betting compact with the Seminole Nation. On today's episode of iGaming Daily, we'll give a basic overview of what is happening in Florida, why other states and tribes are keeping a close eye on the case, and when Hard Rock Bet might go back online in the Sunshine State. We've got info from more than just Florida, too, as later on in the show, Conor Porter, senior journalist for CasinoBeats, is going to be providing a report from his busy day in London, attending both the XtremePush and BetMGM event. I'm your host, Jessica Welman, editor of SBC Americas, joined by my senior journalist, Charlie Horner. Charlie, I feel like we should just start with a big, giant disclaimer that everyone needs to be perfectly clear about. We are not lawyers.
No, absolutely not. It's going to be fun to dive into, but yeah, we're coming at it from a journalistic perspective. Yeah, we're not lawyers.
So while we may offer our insights on how the arguments seem to us, just keep in mind, we're not lawyers. And you know what, though? I think this is going to be a good episode for people who understand that there's a Florida sports betting case, but maybe don't understand some of the particulars of it. Because I think we're going to do our best to just break it down to a level that everyone can understand. Because this gets extremely complicated very easily. All right, what I'm going to start with is I'm going to plug a piece that has very little to do with Florida sports betting, which is yesterday we published an editorial from Jeannie Hovland from the National Indian Gaming Commission on just what has been accomplished in the 35 years since the passing of IGRA. If you're not familiar, IGRA is the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act, and essentially that law created the ability for reservations and tribal nations to allow gaming on their lands and to compact with the states to agree to allow different types of gaming on reservation. And since then, I'm going to get the number wrong. I think it was like 41 billion or something. You know what? I'm not even going to guess. Record numbers, though, for tribes this year when it comes to IGRA, and that is the big deal, the top line numbers. But as Jeannie writes in her editorial, those numbers go to helping support the community, helping with healthcare, building hospitals, and creating community outreach that is not just about the tribes, but about the neighboring groups in states around tribes. And it's a good read. You should go check it out. All right, Charlie, I'm going to kind of put you as in the shoes of the listener, because you're not an American. What did you know about the Florida case before the past, few months?
So I knew that there had been a Hard Rock sportsbook live in Florida back in 2021. And I knew that it very, very quickly was switched off. Now, I knew that there was legal arguments in the background as to why that was, but I wasn't too privy to the details and the specifics. And yeah, I think a lot of listeners will be in a similar position.
I think that's a very good assessment of this. So what happened was the Seminole Nation, which is got, basically a monopoly on a lot of different types of gaming in the state of Florida and has an exorbitant amount of power and control compared to perhaps other tribes in other states. They agreed to a compact with Governor Ron DeSantis that would essentially allow both retail sports betting and allow Hard Rock Bet to have a full monopoly in the state of Florida. The compact argued essentially that because the servers that are hosting Hard Rock Bet would be located on tribal lands, in their mind, all of this amounted to betting being on tribal lands versus off tribal lands, in which case, had it been off tribal lands, you would theoretically need to go get a constitutional amendment in the state of Florida to allow for that. So that was the compact. West Flagler, which is, however many times I read West Flagler, it always looks like a typo, right?
Absolutely. I think that might be one of the first times I've heard it pronounced in speech. So that's an interesting way of saying it.
Yeah, it's that second L. You're just like, I don't think that belongs there. They are essentially a group of local casinos and local gambling establishments that were like, hey, you can't just give them sports betting. That's not fair. So in August of 2021, they filed a federal court case in the DC District Court. By November, the district court had sided with West Flagler that this compact was a violation of IGRA. To be clear, this lawsuit was involving the Department of the Interior versus the Seminole. For those of you, I'm sure Charlie is the Brit, you were like, what on earth is the Department of the Interior? They handle issues within the state, primarily tribal related issues. So Deb Haaland, the Secretary of the Interior, was actually technically the one named in the suit, where they basically were saying, you should have never agreed that this compact was okay, because every state compact has to be approved by Interior, because this allowed for like widespread online betting that is not, on tribal lands, and it shouldn't count. District Court says, that's a good point. We rule in favor of you. The Interior appeals. The mandate does not get stayed, which means Hard Rock Bet, which had gone online towards the end of October in 2021, went offline on December 6th and has not come back online since. Questions so far?
I think that's a really good assessment of where we were up until about 4 or 5 months ago.
Yeah, so the appeals process did take quite some time. So, filed the appeal towards the beginning of 2022, and it was only this past June that we got the ruling in the circuit court, which is the second level of federal courts. And this is where I think things start to get real complicated. So, the circuit court says, you know what? You're right that this is a tenuous definition of what betting on reservation looks like. This hub and spoke, to put quotation marks around it, approach that the hub, the server, is where the bet is taking place, and then the spokes go out to various people betting throughout the state. And their interpretation was, however, that for the purposes of Department of the Interior doesn't matter. Because while IGRA oversees compacts that impact what happens on Indian lands, IGRA has nothing to do with what you may make agreements with off reservation. So Interior was not doing anything out of the ordinary to approve this compact, because for the purposes of what was happening on Indian lands, everything was on the up and up.
I think that this is a good point to say that, it is the 35th anniversary of IGRA this week. And, a lot's changed in those 35 years. We couldn't have anticipated back in 1988 that we would have this proliferation of online sports betting. We didn't have these huge, massive server rooms that could be placed on tribal land. And, I don't necessarily think that IGRA would have been designed to regulate what happens in an internet age. I'm sure that is a massive debate that's going on in legal circles, but I think it is something worth pointing out, and that highlights the complexities of this case, really.
Well, you make a really good point. point too that, this whole location of the server thing, this is not the first case we've actually heard this discussion happening in. The Wire Act, which is from the 60s, when the computers were the size of like my house. So we didn't expect this was coming, and yet we're still using the Wire Act to interpret internet behavior. When there was, under the Trump administration, an opinion from the DOJ on the Wire Act that suggested that basically any transaction on the internet that goes outside of state lines, even though it may start in the state and end in the state, would be a violation of the Wire Act because it then becomes interstate. For those of you who don't really know, basically every internet transaction is bouncing in and around based on IP addresses, multiple states, that to confine it starts in a state, ends in a state is very difficult. And there was a reason that the state lotteries kind of took that opinion to court and challenged it, because they were just like, where did you get this from a document that was written, at this point, 60 odd years ago. And then we eventually, the Biden administration came in, they were not going to enforce that opinion of the Wire Act, and that got resolved. But we actually never really got like a firm delineation one way or the other where a bet technically takes place, because the argument in this DOJ opinion was the server location should be the contributing factor of where a bet takes place.
And not to go on too much of a tangent, really, but do you think that there is appetite to kind of legislate or update any of these existing laws to take into account this sort of, like I said earlier, the proliferation of online sports betting and that kind of thing?
No, I think because we have kind of determined, again, we haven't necessarily litigated it. We've basically determined by consensus that gambling is a 10th Amendment issue, which means it's kind of up to the states to decide what they want to do. There's just little appetite to do much of anything at the federal level. We talked about this with the Tonko bill, right? That I don't think there's anything happening right now that would necessitate federal intervention. You would probably need something like poker compacting to get enormous, or something like that for people to start potentially raising an eyebrow. But yeah, it just goes back to, when it comes to gaming, there's just little federal appetite to do anything around online gaming.
And we're still in early days of the poker compacts as well, really.
Yeah, and they're just not big enough for anybody to really raise an eyebrow or think too much about. But you don't know, because with the path that we're going down with Florida, this could get very high profile. We shall see. As we mentioned, the Circuit Court of Appeals of DC sided with the Department of the Interior. Wes Flagler petitioned for what is called an on-bank rehearing, where all of the judges on the circuit sit and re-litigate the case. That was denied. Then they filed an application with SCOTUS, or Supreme Court. I'm sorry, I'm so used to just saying SCOTUS in my head. The federal Supreme Court. They have yet to file their writ of certiorari in the case, but they did apply for a stay of the mandate at the circuit court level, and it was temporarily approved. So because of that, now Hard Rock continues to stay offline. Until that stay is lifted, they can't go online. The question is, once the stay is lifted, do they choose to go online, given the state of where things are right now? You don't want to rile up judges in various cases. You don't want to rile up the Supreme Court by immediately launching back online and, potentially looking to be overeager to get back. So while they technically can get online, I think some of the question remains, would you do that and potentially risk the long-term potential of being in the state?
Yeah, there was a moment around 4 weeks ago when again, I think we were all logging on the Monday morning expecting or maybe anticipating whether the Seminole would take Hard Rock Bet live. But I think the Seminole have sort of reiterated throughout this entire process that they're going to be cautious with it. They're not going to do anything that will be too, contentious, because, it's probably going to be a long legal battle, and they want to be sure that they can go live and that it won't be taken down again if it does go live.
Yeah, so they have a window until, I believe it's mid-November. It's like 90 days from the date of the denial of the on-bank rehearing to file their writ with the Supreme Court. Just yesterday, Department of Interior filed its brief opposing the stay of the mandate and, arguing largely what the circuit court argued, that the compact is consistent with IGRA, that the compact is consistent with the Unlawful Internet Gambling Enforcement Act, and that, the Secretary's approval of this compact is consistent with equal protection principles. In other words, like, it's not giving preferential treatment to a particular race over another in terms of sports betting in the state. They didn't really bring anything new to the brief, and Daniel Wallach, if you don't follow him on Twitter, he's the person to really follow to understand this Florida court case. He in his tweets gave the brief a C+, in that it didn't really bring new arguments to the table, and it also didn't address some of the legal arguments that Wes Flagler brought in its opinion. The question now is, and part of the reason they say you shouldn't stay the mandate is that they believe the likelihood that the Supreme Court would even hear this case is pretty low, that they would grant the writ. This is where the lawyers I have spoken to seem to agree that the reading of this particular opinion at the circuit court level is so specific that it doesn't really have broader national implications. There are not other states that you could go and be like, well, in Wes Flagler versus Interior, we established this. And generally, the Supreme Court takes on court cases that need to answer a big question that would be applicable other places. While that was happening, Charlie got a nice little civics lesson. While I was away on vacation, I had to briefly hop online and be like, so by the way, there are state courts and there are federal courts, because Charlie, what happened at the state court level roughly the same time that the petition for the on-bank rehearing was reaching its conclusion?
Yeah, what more would you want to be doing with your time off? There was a double-pronged attack because, as Jess rightly points out, Wes Flagler then litigate at the state level, and they file a suit against Governor DeSantis and the Speaker of the House of Florida, Paul Renner, and President of the Senate, Kathleen Passidomo, basically saying that the compacts that they signed back in 2021 was just outside of the authority of the governor, claiming that they don't have any right to grant the tribe exclusive rights to offer betting outside of those tribal lands, and also saying that the legislature exceeded its authority by enacting that law and allowing that compact to be enshrined into Florida law. So yeah, really a double-pronged attack, and that case really is only just getting started. I don't even think Governor DeSantis's representatives has given a substantial sort of response to that yet.
They have not. As of Thursday morning, they actually filed for an extension because he's just like, listen, we got a lot going on. The Solicitor General, who is the attorney for the state, essentially, has so much going on in the next 2 weeks that we really don't have time. I think an important thing to point out here, too, is that in the circuit court opinion, they basically said, if you want to challenge what's happening outside of the reservation, we're simply not the venue to do this. You have to go to the state level because this is a state law. So on the DOI side, they kind of called out West Flagler for waiting 2 years to take it to the state level. But really, they had not been given the guidance that they needed to until a few months ago, because that first opinion, keep in mind, sided with them that this was the right place to do this. So that's an important piece of it. The other thing that I find really interesting about the state court case is there is a group called No Casinos Inc. that in these big court cases at the Supreme Court level, you can file what is called an amicus brief. I hate that it is pronounced amicus. That's another one that I'm like, that can't be right? However, so the amicus brief essentially allows like friendly parties with vested interests in the case to file arguments in favor or against a certain case. No Casinos is this group that got Amendment 3 passed in, I believe it was 2018 in Florida, that basically said, if you want to change the gambling laws in the state of Florida, you need to do so via a constitutional amendment, voter referendum, and it is within the power of the voters to make these changes. So they filed their brief last week, I believe. Yes, last week, and basically argued that this was, they were really quite harsh. They called it disrespectful. They called it like a legal farce. This workaround of the bet taking place at the server. So what's interesting is West Flagler is doing this lawsuit so that they can offer sports betting too, whereas No Casinos, their brief is, none of y'all should be doing this. None of this is okay. So that is why they are not necessarily aligned with the same goals as the West Flagler plaintiffs are.
Yeah, they're just taking it one step at a time. I mean, we were joking on Slack yesterday about some of the specific language that they were using because, a lot of these legal documents can be quite dry, and this one certainly isn't. That's for sure.
So many legal documents. My brain is a bit addled from all of them, but we will not stop. We will keep going. We will continue to cover all of the Florida news on SBC Americas at both the state court and the federal court level. As I mentioned before, we have that great piece from Jeannie on the anniversary of IGRA. Charlie, anything else going on at SBC Americas you think people should pay attention to this week?
Well, we're everyone's highly anticipating the launch of ESPN Bet as Penn changes over from Barstool. And part of that, you could argue that the main part of the reason for doing that is leveraging the ESPN brand. Well, the logo was unveiled yesterday, and it's not red. It's not black and red. ESPN's logo is it's notoriously red, and they've gone for a lovely teal color.
Mint green is what the PR said. I love a mint green. I'm a redhead. Mint green looks good on me. I like mint green. It's an interesting color. The PR also referred to it as a more inclusive color.
Nice.
I don't really know what that means, but I mean, I guess you could argue. I mean, what's green's associated with money, red's associated with losses. I think there's something to be said too, that as you're trying to differentiate not just, betting, but fantasy and other things. For example, the fantasy logo for ESPN doesn't have a tremendous amount of red in it, that this isn't unprecedented for them. And as much as people were bagging on the logo, I will say the thumbnail, which is what you're going to see on your phone and what you're going to see in the Play stores, does actually look pretty good, I think. Do you have opinions on this or no?
Probably not as strong opinions as many, but we will be chronicling the launch of ESPN Bet as we do get closer to it, because it's a massive story this year, and it's something that we're really anticipating.
Yeah, and pay attention to, I've been kind of highlighting in the revenue reports that I've written at the state level, we're seeing now the wind down of Barstool and the wind up of Fanatics. So Massachusetts, some of these other states, it's been interesting to see now that we're getting into September reports and football season, exactly how much ground people are making up in this race for market share of the second wave. All right, keep an eye out for all of those, and certainly keep an eye out for new episodes of iGaming Daily every day, including at least once a week from us, the team at SBC Americas. And don't turn off your pod just yet. We've got, as mentioned earlier, the update from Conor straight from London.
Hi there, Conor Porter, senior journalist for CasinoBeats, here to talk about my journey to London this week for two events hosted by XtremePush and BetMGM in what turned out to be a very long Thursday for myself. Travelled down to London from the northwest on a 10 a.m. train, but from then on it was a non-stop day. And before we go into the day, I am recording this from my hotel room, which is right next to the rail track that goes into Waterloo Station in London. So I do apologise if you can hear some rather unusual sounds besides my own voice whilst I record this little report for you. So to begin with, start off with our XtremePush hosted event at the South Bank Centre, taking place earlier in the day. It was a fantastic event, educational. It had one panel session, an interview, and a fireside chat. Just a quick glance at the interviews that took place during the day. The interviews were with John Smith, the VP Sales of Gamification and Loyalty at XtremePush, who was being interviewed by the CRO of XtremePush, Rob Price. And that went into gamification. That was a great interview about how gamification is going to be moving forward for iGaming. And then the second interview was hosted by the CEO of XtremePush, Tommy Kearns, who spoke to Sam Sadie, who of course is the CEO of LiveScore. But the one I want to focus on is the panel session that took place at the event. And that was all about retention, and it was called Player Engagement 2.0, Turning Visitors into Loyal Players, hosted by Will Hansen, the new business account executive for XtremePush. And it also featured on the panel itself Joanna Beaton, the head of CRM at Quiff, Adrian Caprita, the CRM and VIP director of Superbet, and Tom Dyson, the head of gaming managed services at Every Matrix. And this was all about retention, this event, this panel, about its importance of retention, the marketing function that retention can play, also looking at data access and key metrics that play a big role in retention, tech stack importance as well, and overall the journey as well for retention and how it could play a big role in the future of iGaming across the world. So that was a really good panel, and I'll be covering that panel on CasinoBeats within the next week or so. So be sure to keep visiting the website to make sure you keep track of that. But before I went on to BetMGM, I grabbed a quick bite to eat and then travelled over to Samba Bankside for the BetMGM launch party, which included food, drink, and a Vegas experience. And a bit more on that in a moment. Of course, BetMGM recently made its UK debut, leveraging the technology and the platform of Leo Vegas, which was purchased by the operator in 2022. And Sam Behar was at the event. He gave a short speech at the beginning. Of course, Sam Behar is the UK director of BetMGM. He talked about BetMGM entering the UK market. And I also spoke briefly to Sam during the evening as well, who mentioned how proud he was of his team for keeping the Chris Rock secret under wraps. Of course, Chris Rock is heavily involved in the BetMGM advertising campaign in the UK. Yeah, he's been seen on the adverts traveling from the Bellagio fountains in Las Vegas all the way to River Thames in London on a golden speedboat with a line in the back, ushering in the golden era for sports betting and online casino in the UK. And that's been rolled across TV and radio over the past couple of weeks. Also, Sam revealed during his opening speech that a signed Manchester City shirt was on offer to whoever won the most fake money at the venue's pop-up casino. And that's where the Vegas experience comes into play here. You started off with 300 at the beginning of the night, and there was 3 games on offer: roulette, craps, and blackjack. And whoever won the most money by the end of the evening was to win this signed Manchester City shirt. And I'm not sure who won at the end of the evening, but it was a good night. I'm sure the person would have been contacted, hopefully. But the highest figure I got to during the evening was 1,000, but then I lost it all playing on roulette and craps. I did well on blackjack, but overall it was a great evening. So now I leave you to enjoy your weekend as I travel back up north now to rest up over the weekend. And with that, I hope everyone listening has a lovely weekend as well. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of iGaming Daily, brought to you in conjunction with SBC Summit Latino America, being held at the Seminole Hard Rock Hotel and Casino in Miami on the 31st of October to the 2nd of November. If you want to find out more about some of the subjects raised today, feel free to explore any of the sites in the SBC News Network. Happy reading.